December 20th, 1984. 5 days before Christmas. The streets of Greeley, Colorado are blanketed in fresh snow, the kind that makes the world look clean and new. Christmas lights blink from rooftops. Presents are already tucked beneath trees. In a small split-level home at 320 43rd Avenue Court, a space heater glows warm and orange in the living room. But by morning, this quiet college town, a place where kids rode their bikes on dirt roads and neighbors left their front doors unlocked, would become a place where bad things could happen. Where they did happen. This is the story of 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews, a girl with braces and a theatrical personality who loved to sing. A girl who would become one of the first faces printed on a milk carton in America. A girl whose disappearance would reach all the way to the White House. And this is the story of how it took 35 years and the courage of one terrified woman to finally bring her killer to justice. To understand what was stolen that December night, you need to know who Jonelle Matthews was. Not just a victim, not just a face on a carton, a real girl with dreams and quirks and a laugh that filled a room. Jonelle Renee Matthews was born on February 9, 1972, in Santa Barbara, California. Her birth mother, Terry Vieira, was just 13 years old, a child herself. 6 weeks later, Jonelle was adopted by Jim and Gloria Matthews, a loving couple who already had one daughter, Jennifer, who was 4 years older. The Matthews family epitomized the American dream of the 1980s. Jim Matthews would eventually become principal of Platte Valley Elementary School in Kersey, Colorado. Gloria was a devoted mother who created a warm, structured home. They were a church-going family, tight-knit and protective. Jennifer, Jonelle's older sister, would later describe their relationship with painful honesty. Yes, there was typical sibling rivalry, the kind where an older sister finds her younger sibling annoying, where a 12-year-old wants to tag along and the teenager wants her space. But beneath that surface, friction was love. And after December 20th, 1984, Jennifer would never get the chance to grow into the kind of relationship she might have had with her little sister. Jonelle's friend Deanna Ross remembers her vividly. She was very funny and just very loud. She was really theatrical and dramatic and just the center of the room. Jonelle loved riding bikes around the neighborhood with her friends. She had sleepovers and birthday parties. She was obsessed with the boy band Menudo, like so many 12-year-old girls in 1984. But Jonelle wasn't just a typical kid. She had depth, strength of character. Her father would later describe her as strong, independent, opinionated. She sang in the Franklin Middle School honor choir, her voice clear and confident. On December 20th, 1984, she was about to step into a spotlight she never asked for. That Thursday evening began like any other busy family night. The Matthews were pulling in 4 different directions, each member with their own commitments. Gloria Matthews was at the airport, flying to California to care for her ailing father. 16-year-old Jennifer was playing varsity basketball at Greeley Central High School. Jim Matthews was at that game, cheering his older daughter on from the stands. And Jonelle, bright, enthusiastic Jonelle, was performing with her middle school choir at the Intra-West Bank building in downtown Greeley. It was a Christmas concert. Broadcast on local cable television, Jonelle sang carols with her friend Deanna Ross, their young voices echoing through the bank lobby, decorated with garland and lights. The concert ended around 8 p.m. Deanna's father, Russell Ross, offered to drive Jonelle home. He was the last person who would see Jonelle alive. He pulled up to the split-level house on 43rd Avenue Court. The garage door was partially open, not unusual, nothing alarming. Jonelle gathered her things, thanked Mr. Ross, and walked into her home. Russell Ross didn't wait to see her go inside. Why would he? This was Greeley in 1984. This was a safe neighborhood, a place where nothing bad happened. But it did happen. Right then, in those quiet moments after 8 p.m., around 8:30 p.m., the phone rang at the Matthews house. Jonelle answered. She took a message for her father from someone calling about a car, a perfectly normal interaction that would later help investigators pinpoint the time of her abduction. Then, sometime between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m., in the span of an hour that felt like any other winter evening, Jonelle Matthews disappeared. When Jim Matthews came home around 9:30 p.m., he found an empty house. The television was still on. The space heater near Jonelle's chair was still warming the room. A pair of stockings lay on the couch. Jonelle's shoes were kicked off near the heater, but Jonelle was gone. At first, Jim wasn't alarmed. Maybe she'd gone to a friend's house. Maybe there was a simple explanation. But when Jennifer came home from her basketball game around 10 p.m. with no information about her sister's whereabouts, the worry began to crystallize into something darker, something terrifying. Jim Matthews called the Greeley Police Department. It was around 10:30 p.m. when the first officers arrived at 320 43rd Avenue Court. They found no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced entry. But outside in the fresh snow, they discovered something chilling. Footprints near a window, as if someone had peeked inside. And those footprints showed strange marks. Someone had tried to erase them with a rake, sweeping the snow to hide their presence. The rake came right out of the Matthews' own garage. 27-year-old police officer John Gates, who would later become Greeley's mayor, walked the perimeter of the house that freezing night, his flashlight cutting circles in the darkness. He knew immediately this was bad, very bad. There were no signs of a struggle, Lieutenant Paul Branham told reporters the next day, but there are indications of possible foul play. We are regarding this as a possible kidnapping. By dawn on December 21st, the news had spread through Greeley like a virus. A 12-year-old girl vanished from her own living room. No witnesses, no answers. This wasn't supposed to happen here. Former Greeley Tribune reporter Mike Peters lived in Jonelle's neighborhood. He remembers waking up to see police cars in front of the Matthews home. After Jonelle went missing, we watched our kids a lot closer, he recalls. We always had a parent go along with them. The kids all wondered why we were doing that. We tried to explain that a little girl was missing, and we didn't want it to happen to them. Diane Duvall, a young mother in Greeley at the time, speaks for so many when she says, "We were terrified. It changed the town. It makes you paranoid." The search began immediately. Hundreds of volunteers combed fields near the Matthews home. A coalition of local churches organized a 24-hour prayer vigil. Police formed lines and walked through the frozen landscape, searching for any sign of the girl with braces who'd been singing Christmas carols just hours before. The FBI joined the investigation. Tips poured in, eventually hundreds of them, but none led anywhere. And inside the Matthews home, Christmas presents for Jonelle remained under the tree. Gloria Matthews had stood in line for hours to buy her daughter a Cabbage Patch doll, one of the most coveted toys of 1984. It stayed wrapped, waiting for a girl who would never come home to open it. Gloria Matthews would later say, "Everywhere we went, I was always looking for her. I always had hope that I would find her. In my dreams, she always came home. She always came home." But in reality, there was only silence and snow. And the terrible not knowing that would stretch on for decades. If you're listening to this story and feeling that familiar pull, that need to understand how darkness can hide in plain sight, please subscribe to our channel. These stories matter. These families matter. And your support helps us continue bringing these important cases to light. Jonelle Matthews disappeared at a unique moment in American history. The early 1980s had been marked by high-profile child abduction cases that shocked the nation. 6-year-old Etan Potts vanished in New York City in 1979. 6-year-old Adam Walsh was abducted and murdered in Florida in 1981. 11-year-old Johnny Gosch disappeared in Iowa in 1982. These cases awakened America to a terrifying reality. Children weren't safe, even in their own neighborhoods. In 1984, the same year Jonelle disappeared, President Ronald Reagan's administration established the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That same year, the National Child Safety Council launched the Missing Children Milk Carton program. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Put the faces of missing children on milk cartons. Every American family had milk in their refrigerator. Every breakfast table became a potential billboard. Millions of eyes, every single morning, looking at the faces of children who needed to be found. Jonelle Matthews became one of the very first children featured in this campaign. Her face, young, hopeful, wearing her school photo smile, appeared on milk cartons across the country. On March 7, 1985, less than 3 months after Jonelle's disappearance, President Ronald Reagan addressed a gathering of newspaper editors. His words carried the weight of a nation's grief. Parents cry out for help. Many through letters to me. For example, I learned about Jonelle Matthews of Greeley, Colorado, who would have celebrated a happy 13th birthday with her family just last month. But 5 days before Christmas, Jonelle disappeared from her home. He continued, "Letters like these touch us deeply, and we've tried our best to help. Last June, we opened the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which runs a toll-free hotline and gives other aid as well. But a president can only do so much. So, today, I'd like to ask for your help." The President of the United States knew Jonelle Matthews' name. The entire nation was looking for her. But despite this unprecedented attention, despite the milk cartons and the FBI and the hundreds of tips, Jonelle remained missing. The case went cold. Not forgotten, never forgotten by your family, but cold. The kind of cold that settles into investigators' filing cabinets and family members' hearts. A permafrost of unanswered questions. But while Greeley mourned and searched, while Gloria and Jim Matthews held on to hope and President Reagan spoke Jonelle's name, the truth was living just 2 miles away. Steven Dana Pankey was born in 1951 inches Ventura, California. His family had deep religious roots. His grandfather, Dr. Dana Pankey Sr., was a Baptist minister who had actually served as pastor of Greeley's Bethel Baptist Church from 1941 to 1942. But by the time Steven came of age, his path had taken darker turns. Pankey graduated from an alternative high school in California and enlisted in the U.S. Army. He served for exactly 1 year before being discharged from Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Pankey himself would later suggest his discharge was related to his sexuality, a time in his life he called part of the gay lifestyle that he claimed to have repented for. By 1977, Pankey was back in Greeley, working as a salesman at a Chevrolet car dealership. He had married a young woman named Angela Hicks in 1979, and by 1984, they had a 5-year-old son named Carl. Steven Pankey was also working as a security guard. He had studied criminal justice at Ames Community College, fascinated by people who acted without a conscience, and he attended Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene, the same church the Matthews family would join in the summer of 1978, after Pankey had been excommunicated. To his neighbors, Steven Pankey was odd, prickly, the kind of man who got into petty disputes and made scenes. Just one day before Jonelle disappeared, on December 19, 1984, Pankey had been arrested for causing a disturbance at a bank, arguing with a teller until police were called. But odd isn't criminal. Strange isn't murderous. And in 1984, investigators had no reason to focus on the uncomfortable man who lived 2 miles from the Matthews home. The man who, according to the indictment, had a habit of watching students walk home from Franklin Middle School, the school Jonelle attended. The man who owned a gun. Angela Hicks lived in a cage, not a physical one. The bars of her prison were psychological, emotional. Her husband, Steven Pankey, was controlling in ways both obvious and insidious. He forbade her from driving. He wouldn't allow her to see her father. And by 1983, he had banned all media from their home on 10th Street. No television, no radio, no newspapers, no music, no more music, no TV, no radio, no newspapers. Angela recalls him declaring, "This is going to be a godly home." It was in this atmosphere of control and isolation that December 20th, 1984 unfolded. Angela's testimony, given decades later in a Greeley courtroom, would prove crucial. And her memory of those days is crystal clear, the kind of clarity that comes from trauma, from fear, from living with a secret too terrible to speak aloud. Steven Pankey's father had invited them to spend Christmas in Big Bear, California. Pankey had asked his dad for money to make the trip, but he'd told Angela they weren't going. To me, it was like he was wanting his dad to send him the money, but there was no plan to go, Angela testified. So when Steven came home on the afternoon of December 21st, just one day after Jonelle disappeared, and announced they were leaving for California immediately, Angela was shocked. "Get us ready to go," he told her. "We're leaving before daylight tomorrow morning to go to Big Bear for Christmas." I was just shocked because the last thing I had understood was that we weren't going, Angela said on the stand. So my first thought was for the dogs. The Pankeys had 2 Great Danes, Marble and Butch. Who would take care of them? "Don't worry about the dogs," Steven told her. "The dogs are gone." "The dogs are gone?" Angela repeated, confused. "Don't worry about the dogs. I dumped the dogs. Get us ready to go." Angela Hicks never saw those dogs again. On December 22nd, 2 days after Jonelle Matthews vanished, the Pankey family left Greeley before dawn. They drove to Big Bear, California, where Steven's parents lived. But the trip was tense and short-lived. Steven got into an argument with his father. They left early, driving back to Colorado on Christmas Day. And during that long drive home, something strange happened. Something that would haunt Angela Hicks for decades. About halfway home, Angela testified, he asked me to turn on the radio. This might not sound significant, but remember, Steven Pankey had banned all media from their home for over a year. No radio, no TV, nothing. Angela hadn't been allowed to listen to music or news in more than 12 months. "I was shocked," she said, "because the last thing I knew, we weren't allowed to have the radio on." But Steven was insistent. "Find news. Keep searching." "In my flipping around," Angela testified, "I came to a portion of a news report that indicated that a girl had gone missing from Greeley, Colorado. and he wanted to hear that. And then he wanted me to keep flipping the channels to see if he could hear anything more about that. For hours, as they drove across Colorado, Steven Pankey made his wife search radio stations for news about Jonelle Matthews. Hours. A man who had forbidden all media in his home for more than a year was suddenly desperate for every detail about a missing 12-year-old girl. When they arrived back in Greeley, instead of going home, Pankey drove straight to a Safeway grocery store. He made Angela take the last of their change and buy newspapers, the Greeley Tribune and the Denver Post. And then, in that Safeway parking lot, he made his wife read the articles about Jonelle Matthews to him, out loud, multiple times. I recall him having me read each one at least 3 times, Angela said. In the days after their return, Angela Hicks watched her husband's behavior become even more bizarre. On one of those cold December afternoons, Steven came home, changed into coveralls and galoshes, and announced there were problems with their septic tank. He went outside and began digging in the front yard. This struck Angela as odd. The septic tank had been replaced earlier that year. There shouldn't be any problems. But she didn't question him. When you live in fear, you learn not to ask questions. Within a week, Angela smelled smoke. She went outside to investigate and found Steven standing next to a burning car at the far back of their property, holding a shovel. A burning car. On their property. The only car that ever caught fire there. The pieces were there, scattered like the footprints in the snow that someone had tried to rake away, but Angela was living in survival mode, isolated from her family, controlled in every aspect of her life. She couldn't see the pattern yet, or maybe she could, but didn't dare acknowledge it. Years passed. The Pankeys moved away from Greeley in 1987, leaving in the middle of the night. They moved to Oklahoma, then to Idaho, settling in the Ketchum area before eventually relocating to Twin Falls. Steven Pankey reinvented himself. He became more involved in politics, running for public office multiple times in Idaho, lieutenant governor in 2010, governor in 2014 and 2018. His campaign posters promised traditional core values with a biblical and constitutional perspective. He received just 1.4% of the vote in the 2018 Republican primary. But Pankey couldn't stay away from the Jonelle Matthews case. It was as if he was compelled, pulled by some dark gravity back to that December night in 1984. In 1985, just weeks after Jonelle's disappearance, Pankey contacted the Fort Collins FBI office. He claimed he wanted to talk to them about information that may or may not have something to do with the Jonelle Matthews case. His story was bizarre. He claimed his father-in-law, Angela's father, who worked as a groundskeeper at a Greeley cemetery, had told him that a police officer contacted him, saying he needed help burying a body. Pankey was connecting dots that didn't exist, inserting himself into the investigation. This story was a lie. Pankey would admit as much decades later. But it was the first of many times he would insert himself into the case. In 1995, while dealing with legal issues in Idaho, Pankey made a chilling comment. Angela was there when he said it. He had information about Jonelle Matthews' disappearance, but he wouldn't tell authorities without immunity. In 1999, in a pleading to the Idaho Supreme Court, Pankey wrote, "Without a deal, this case will never be solved." In 2003, in another legal document, he wrote, "The family should be informed that Jonelle died before crossing 10th, and not to give the family hope." And in a 2013 letter, he claimed, "About a week after the fact, I realized a blanket, or comforter, or quilt, also disappeared from the Matthews house. How did he know these details? The Matthews family never reported a missing blanket. The attempted rake marks in the snow were never released to the public. Yet Panky knew about them. At her son Carl's funeral in 2008, Carl had been murdered in Arizona. Angela heard Steven Pankey bend down to kiss the urn. Through his tears, he said words that would echo in her mind for years. "I hope God didn't allow this to happen because of Jonelle Matthews." What did that mean? Was he suggesting his son's death was some kind of cosmic punishment? For what? Angela Hicks was terrified. She had divorced Panky in 2002, but she still feared him. She had once found a piece of legal paper in his trash, covered in his handwriting, with notes about the case. One line read, "Snow outside the Matthews house was raked. Only the killer would know that detail. Only the killer and the police." Angela reached out to law enforcement in 1999. She tried to tell them what she knew, what she suspected, but her story seemed to fall on deaf ears. Years passed. The case remained cold, and Angela lived with her terrible knowledge, wondering if she would ever be free of the fear. Before we continue with the breakthrough that finally brought justice for Jonelle, I want to remind you that stories like this take time, research, and dedication to tell with the respect they deserve. If you value deep-dive true crime content that honors victims and their families, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with others who care about justice. On Tuesday afternoon, July 23, 2019, excavation workers were installing a pipeline in rural Weld County, Colorado. The location was about 15 miles southeast of the Matthews' former home, near the intersection of County Roads 34.5 and 49, a desolate stretch of farmland. At 4:50 p.m., the excavator's bucket hit something. The operator climbed down to investigate. What he found would change everything. A human's skull, tattered red and blue clothing, the lower jawbone separated from the rest of the remains, lying in the dirt like a prayer left unanswered for 3 decades. The Greeley Tribune received anonymous photos of the discovery. Out of respect for Jonelle and her family, they never published the images, but they described what they showed: a small hole in the earth, about the size of a basketball hoop, and emerging from that hole, the bones of someone who had been waiting a very long time to be found. DNA testing confirmed what investigators already suspected. After 34 years, 10 months, and 3 days, Jonelle Matthews had been found. The Weld County Coroner's Office determined the cause of death: a single gunshot wound to the head. She had been killed almost immediately after being taken from her home. Jonelle had died wearing the same red and blue outfit she'd worn to sing Christmas carols that December night in 1984. She had never had the chance to grow up, to fall in love, to become the person she was meant to be. She was 12 years old forever, frozen in time, like the snow that had fallen on Greeley that night. Gloria Matthews, upon learning her daughter had been found, felt something she hadn't expected: relief, some closure, as Jonelle's sister Jennifer described it. The not knowing had been its own kind of torture. Now finally, they knew. And knowing, as painful as it was, meant they could grieve properly. They could lay their daughter to rest. The discovery of Jonelle's remains breathed new life into the investigation. Detective Robert Cash, who had inherited the cold case years earlier and had made a promise to the Matthews family that he would never give up, intensified his efforts. Cash was uniquely connected to this case. He had actually attended Greeley Central High School's homecoming dance with Jonelle's sister Jennifer as part of a group of friends in 1984. He remembered the disappearance. He remembered how it had shattered Greeley. And when the case landed on his desk 30 years later, he refused to let it gather dust. "I pledged unwavering attention," Cash said. "I'm sure they had heard that from others before me, but I was steadfast in this promise." Investigators traveled to Twin Falls, Idaho on August 15, 2019, to question Steven Pankey. He immediately asked for a lawyer. He asked for a deal. He refused to answer questions. On September 4, 2019, police executed a search warrant on Pankey's Idaho condominium. On September 13, 2019, the Greeley Police Department publicly announced that Steven Dana Pankey was a person of interest in Jonelle Matthews' abduction and murder. The man who had run for governor of Idaho twice. The man who had been a youth pastor. The man who had inserted himself into the investigation for 35 years was finally in the spotlight he had always seemed to crave. But this time, the spotlight was about to burn. On October 13, 2020, Steven Pankey was indicted by a grand jury on charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The case against him was circumstantial. There was no DNA evidence, no fingerprints, no confession. But what prosecutors had was a pattern of behavior so damning, so incriminating, that it painted a clear picture of guilt. They had the unexpected trip to California just one day after Jonelle disappeared. They had the obsessive search for news coverage during the drive home. They had the digging in the yard. They had the burning car. They had Pankey's repeated insertions into the investigation, his claims of knowledge, his demands for immunity. Most importantly, they had Angela Hicks. And they had the rake. Only the killer and the police knew about the rake marks in the snow. Pankey had mentioned them to investigators in 2019, before that detail was ever made public. He had written about it in notes Angela had found in the trash in the 1980s. "How did you know?" prosecutors would ask. Pankey had no good answer. Steven Pankey's first trial began on October 14, 2021. It lasted weeks. Angela Hicks took the stand and told her story. The story of a controlled, frightened woman who had lived with a terrible suspicion for decades. The defense argued that Pankey was simply a true crime enthusiast, obsessed with the case but innocent of the crime. They pointed to another suspect, Norris Drake, whose mother had lived across the street from the Matthews home. Drake had since died and couldn't defend himself against the accusations. But the jury heard testimony about Pankey's knowledge of details only the killer would know. They heard about his strange behavior, his insertions into the case, his comment at his son's funeral. On November 4, 2021, after days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on one count of false reporting to authorities, but on the main charges, kidnapping and murder, they were deadlocked. The judge declared a mistrial. Steven Pankey would have to face trial again. The second trial began in October 2022. Once again, Angela Hicks took the stand. Once again, the evidence was laid out. The timeline, the knowledge, the obsession, the lies. This time, Steven Pankey himself testified. He admitted he had lied repeatedly about the case. "The truth is that I made a lot of stuff up out of bitterness," he said. "It was just me trying to be a big man. Be in the case, okay? I had no knowledge." But the jury didn't believe him. On October 31, 2022, 37 years, 10 months, and 11 days after Jonelle Matthews disappeared, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty of kidnapping with a deadly weapon. Guilty of felony murder. Guilty of false reporting to authorities. At his sentencing hearing, Jim Matthews addressed the man who had killed his daughter. His words carried the weight of nearly 4 decades of grief, but also the grace of a father who had never stopped loving. As these 2 trials have shown, you have been obsessed with your actions, and your consciousness could not let you forget, Jim said to Panky. You have been a prisoner of your own mind. You've claimed to be a Christian on many occasions. There's still hope for you. It is not too late to confess your sins, which is the first step to your forgiveness. The second step is to repent or turn away from your evil ways. The gates of heaven can still be open for you. It's not too late, Steve Panky. God is waiting. But Panky, given the chance to confess, to finally tell the truth, doubled down on his claims of innocence. I am a Christian. I will be in heaven, he said. I am innocent, and this is not justice for Jonelle. The judge sentenced Steven Panky to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 20 years. His earliest parole eligibility date is scheduled for 2040, when he will be 89 years old. He is currently serving his sentence at Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Ordway, Colorado. Angela Hicks, watching the verdict from her car via live stream, felt neither joy nor sorrow. She felt relief. After decades of marriage to a controlling man, after years of living in fear, after testifying in 2 trials, she finally felt safe. Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke was clear. Without Angela Hicks, the suspect in the 1984 kidnapping and murder of 2-year-old Jonelle Matthews would have never been arrested, indicted, or convicted. In May 2024, Angela Hicks finally met Jim and Gloria Matthews in person. During the trials, witnesses weren't allowed to interact, so they had only exchanged glances in passing heartbreaking moments when eyes met but words couldn't be spoken. Their meeting was emotional, healing. The Matthews brought Angela flowers and a dozen fresh eggs from their chickens. They visited for hours at Angela's home, then went to a Mexican restaurant for dinner, and talked more. 8 hours together that felt like one. Before parting, they prayed together. They are such lovely people, Angela said. It was like a reunion with long-lost friends. Jennifer Matthews Mogensen, Jonelle's sister, spoke about the closure the arrest and conviction brought. But she also acknowledged what was lost forever. While there had been sibling rivalry between us in 1984, Jennifer said, the disappearance and murder eliminated the possibility for the 2 siblings to grow closer. She would never get to be adults with her sister, never get to be aunts to each other's children, never get to laugh about their childhood from the perspective of age and wisdom. That possibility was buried in a field in Weld County for 35 years. And even though justice was finally served, that loss, that theft of a future, can never be recovered. Gloria Matthews lived with a particular kind of anguish for decades. She had entrusted her adopted daughter to a safe, loving home. She had tried to protect her. And then, in one terrible hour on a December night, Jonelle was taken. Years after the disappearance, when Jonelle's birth mother, Terry Vieira Martinez, learned through a consultant that her daughter was missing, she wrote to Jim and Gloria Matthews, asking for a reunion. I was thrilled that Jonelle's mother wanted to contact her, Gloria told the Greeley Tribune in 1997, because Jonelle had always wanted that. But then I had to tell Terry that the little girl she entrusted to us is gone. I had to ask myself, could I have taken better care of her? The 2 women met. They grieved together. And Terry, Jonelle's birth mother, said something that captured the impossible pain of the situation. This has put some closure in my life. Jonelle has always been part of my prayers, ever since she was born, and now not knowing where she is, I'll continue to pray for her. In Greeley, Colorado, a chokecherry tree was planted in front of Franklin Middle School in memory of Jonelle Matthews. The tree eventually died. A plaque with Jonelle's name disappeared, but the memory hasn't disappeared. An entire generation of Greeley residents carries the weight of December 20th, 1984. They remember the fear. They remember how their town changed. They remember a girl with braces and a big voice who loved to sing Christmas carols. Evan Sichler, a Greeley native who was exactly Jonelle's age, said when he heard her remains had been found, "Nearly all of the air left my lungs. She was exactly my age, and when she disappeared, everyone was on edge. I don't think we ever got over it." Mike Peters, the former Greeley Tribune reporter who covered the case, said, "The effect on Greeley was pretty strong. It was a frightening time for people. That fear, that loss of innocence, it's the invisible scar that Steven Pankey left on an entire community, one that can never fully heal." Jonelle Matthews' face on those milk cartons didn't bring her home, but it changed America. The milk carton program, which featured Jonelle and countless other missing children throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, raised awareness about child abduction in unprecedented ways. It made missing children a breakfast table conversation. It kept cases alive in public consciousness. Though the program ended in the late 1990s, replaced by Amber Alerts and digital missing persons databases, its impact remains. It was part of a larger movement that led to the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which has helped recover over 440,000 missing children since 1984. Jonelle's face on that carton represented something bigger than one girl's tragedy. It represented a nation waking up to a problem it had ignored for too long. Today, when a child goes missing, we have Amber Alerts that flash across our phones within minutes. We have databases that can be searched instantly. We have DNA technology that can identify remains with certainty. In 1984, none of that existed. Jonelle Matthews disappeared into a void where technology couldn't reach and time couldn't heal. But she wasn't forgotten. Her family never stopped searching. Detective Robert Cash never stopped investigating. And Angela Hicks, despite her fear, finally found the courage to speak. That's how justice happens in cold cases. Not through dramatic breakthroughs or sudden revelations, but through the quiet persistence of people who refuse to let the truth stay buried. On a winter day in 2019, when Jonelle's remains were finally returned to her family for burial, the Matthews held a private memorial service. After 35 years of not knowing, of hoping against hope, of keeping presents under the tree and candles in the window, they could finally say goodbye. Jim Matthews, the principal who became an advocate for missing children, the father who never stopped believing justice would come, reflected on those decades of waiting. "We always had hope that somehow, some way, someday, we would find Jonelle," he said, "and we did. Not the way we wanted, but we found her, and that means everything." Steven Pankey sits in a Colorado prison cell today, still maintaining his innocence, still claiming he's a victim, still unable or unwilling to give the Matthews family the one thing they've never received: the truth about that December night. Why he targeted Jonelle, how he got her out of her house, what his final moments with her were like. Those answers may never come, and the Matthews family has made peace with that. Because at the end of this story, there's something more powerful than answers. There's memory. There's love. There's a 12-year-old girl who sang Christmas carols with such joy that people still remember her voice. A girl who loved menudo and had sleepovers and rode her bike around the neighborhood. A girl who was more than a victim, more than a face on a milk carton. Jonelle Renee Matthews was a person, a daughter, a sister, a friend, and she will never be forgotten. For the Matthews family, for Angela Hicks, for the town of Greeley, and for every child who has ever gone missing, may justice always find a way. May the truth always rise to the surface. And may we never stop fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. This has been the story of Jonelle Matthews. Rest in peace, Jonelle. Your voice still echoes.